Now, in the United States, the Democrats are pushing ahead with moves to remove President Donald Trump from office with less than 10 days before U.S. President-elect Joe Biden is sworn in. Democrats plan to urge Vice President Mike Pence to vote so that Trump can be removed. It follows last week's violent protests at the Capitol building, which resulted in the deaths of 5 people. Trump challenged the validity of Biden's election victory and egged on supporters before they laid siege to the Capitol. To give us analysis on Trump's possible removal, we cross to political analyst from the University of Western Cape School of Governance, Patrick Bond. Patrick, a very good morning and a happy new year to you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Happy New Year. Thanks for having me.
Talk to us about the appetite to impeach President Donald Trump for the second time.
You know, last year at this time, the United States Senate held the impeachment trial because a few weeks earlier, in late 2019, the House of Representatives, the lower part of their parliament, had impeached Trump. Only Bill Clinton and a prior president had this dishonor. And what you need in the Senate to make the impeachment an actual conviction is 2/3. And of course, with the Republican Senate a year ago, on the trial on grounds that Trump had colluded with the Ukrainian president in a deal that was associated with trying to undermine now the incoming president, Joe Biden. Trump was ultimately acquitted, but he still is known as the president who's been impeached. This impeachment that's coming through probably tomorrow, but certainly Wednesday, will be the only time a second impeachment has occurred. So we can expect that to happen because the House of Representatives is led by Nancy Pelosi, who really wants to make it happen. But then we've seen the Senate already still controlled by Republicans, Trump's party, tell everyone that they won't consider this until January 19. But on January 20, Trump's out of office anyway, because Biden is going to be inaugurated. It's a very symbolic process, but maybe it's important to send a signal to Donald Trump as he leaves that at least that one part of the Congress, the House of Representatives, is now impeached him for the second time.
Now, the storming of the U.S. Capitol, how is this being viewed by both America's allies and adversaries?
Well, I think the most interesting thing is the split within U.S. politics and the society. Of course, around the world, if you are a critic of the United States, to make out this bastion of democracy as in fact a banana republic is quite easy. But, you know, internally, there seems to be a very profound split between the Republican old guard establishment, and they didn't want Trump in at the outset, and a large chunk of his support, around 45% of Republicans, want him to stay and, in fact, think that the election where he lost last November 3rd was actually rigged. So you have this sort of amazing split between the Trump wing, let's call them populists. They're libertarian, they use the QAnon conspiracy theory, and there are tens of millions, 75 million people had voted for Trump November 3rd. And then you have the establishment really led by Mitch McConnell, with most of the US Senate and probably a fair chunk of the House saying, good riddance, he must be gone. And then you have a similar split in the Democratic Party between the establishment, Biden now leading that into the presidency, and the left populists led by Bernie Sanders. And we're still waiting to see how those conflicts will play out in coming weeks as Biden disappoints them. But I think critically, whether Trump should be pushed out now, Vice President Pence has a chance to do it if he can get out of 15 members of his cabinet, 8 of them have to agree, and he's already said he won't do that. And then the other option is that this establishment group and enough of the former Trump supporters would actually go and visit Trump and say, no, come on, you must resign now. And if you recall, that's what actually happened here with Thabo Mbeki in September 2008, and then with Jacob Zuma in February 2018. So the sort of, let's say, the inner circle of power would like they did to Richard Nixon in 1974. They just say, no, stand aside now. Let Vice President Pence come in. Maybe he'll give Trump a pardon. So we'll still see what happens over the next 9 or 10 days. But Trump, is going out in a whimper. He's going tomorrow to visit his wall, the big wall he promised against Mexican immigration. He actually achieved in only getting about 20 Ks of that wall built where he's visiting tomorrow in southern Texas. So a bit of a disappointment, but he wants to still signal his ongoing commitment to a sort of xenophobia to that loyal base. So we'll see if he's able to do anything more in his last 9 or 10 days to give his last days in the presidency the kind of bang that he's so well known for.
So as the debate around whether impeachment or resignation goes on, two issues come up. There's been a conversation about accountability and consequences, not only for the people who marched on Capitol, but for people at the top, such as the current president as well. And the other issue is that if you go for impeachment, which might be drawn out, it might divert attention from important issues such as the fight against COVID-19. What your thoughts on this?
Yes, just on that last point, not only is this a bit of a distraction, you could argue the same was the case on the Ukrainian impeachment a year ago. But in fact, Trump was being, touted as doing something more spectacular, like starting a war with Iran. And so I think a lot of attention to these last days, the probably new amnesties he's going to offer his mates that had been, convicted in serving his interests. That's one of the things you'll want to keep in mind. As to the first question, I mean, it's a very interesting period for the United States really to reassess where it stands in the world. And I think the main dilemma is whether Joseph Biden will come in with this Senate now in his grasp, because in this dramatic week that's happened last Tuesday in the state of Georgia, he won the Democrats won both of the seats that were at stake in this sort of special election. So it will be a 51-50 Democratic majority, and that would give Biden a great deal more, potential to do some fairly dramatic reversals of Trump's xenophobic and racist and anti-ecological and patriarchal agenda. And probably his first thing will be to do something that Trump had postured he wanted to do, which is to give $2,000 to everyone in the U.S., every adult, so they could reboot the economy and try and protect people from the COVID-19 disaster as it's unfolding. And that would also include, one would hope, a more rapid and effective rollout of the vaccine. And I think we're all hoping that the United States might stand down in the World Trade Organization on its insistence that there are intellectual property rights for the companies like Pfizer and Moderna, Johnson & Johnson, that have, from the U.S., claimed these monopoly patent rights on the vaccines, on medicines during this world pandemic. So we certainly have high hopes that there would be some changes. Final point on accountability that you asked. Is there accountability for Trump if he has no voice anymore, because he was kicked off of Twitter permanently and Facebook permanently? And then his plan B was something called Parler, a right-wing network, and they were just kicked off from Google and Amazon and Apple. So really the voice of that far right goes silent. And that means the very far right, the alt-right, the libertarians that are going to be coming up again in the streets in Kentucky the last day or so, and possibly even in Washington and other state capitals again in the coming days. Well, the big question will be, this time, will the police, will military forces, keep them from threatening the politicians? And we don't know the answer to that for probably another 10 days.
Yeah. Just a final question. President-elect Joe Biden tweeting yesterday that in 10 days we move forward and rebuild together. What can we see happening in the next few days in terms of tricks that Trump can pull out of the hat leading up to his final days?
Well, I think it will be pardoning his friends. So, for example, he's already pardoned his former national security advisor, a man called Michael Flynn, a former general, who has now really taken that freedom that he's got, no longer in jail, to more or less lead these resurgent far-right forces. But there are plenty of others. One is a man called Paul Manafort, who cheated, and others, Steve Bannon, who used to be his sort of most important strategic advisor. These are the people close to him that never really completely turned on him as they went to jail. And I think we'll be expecting some, fairly sleazy pardons. I think he's overreached so far last Wednesday in encouraging that large group, tens of thousands of people, maybe 10,000 marched from his rally last Wednesday morning over to the Capitol and then created mayhem. And I think that overreach and the fact that the Republican establishment has really broken with him, and he doesn't really have much future in this party, even though he's such loyal supporters, probably 45% of those Republicans. But I think he's going to fade away. And he is getting old, and there's, maybe Josh Hawley taking his place, a young Republican senator from Missouri who with Ted Cruz kind of stood firm. But it's a disastrous overreach. They certainly showed the very limits of the logic of the far-right agenda. And even one or two of their websites, like the Drudge Report, have begun to wane away from supporting them. So I think they've made a case in a way that an insurgency of a motley crew of this sort can do the far-right much more harm than good, no matter that Trump was celebrating the loyalty of his base last week.
Well, I hope to talk to you again as we count down to the 20th, but thanks for your time. Political analyst Patrick Bond there, looking at U.S.